Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension Garden and Country Extension webinar. Today, we've got Dawn Gouge with us, and she's going to be talking about insects, weather, and climate. Very timely topic. So thank you, Dawn.
Thank you. Chris, thanks ever so much for, oh, sorry.
You're welcome. No, I'm sorry. I kind of need to move to the next slide here. I'd like to just share a little bit about these webinars. They're a weekly Zoom webinar, 60 minutes or less, Thursdays at 11. They feature a variety of horticulture and natural resource topics relevant to the environmental conditions and residential concerns of Gila County and anywhere else in the world that you would have interest in the topic. A recording of this will be posted at the extension.arizona.edu/Gila website. You can email me at ckjones@arizona.edu. I've been getting these recordings pretty quickly, so should be able to have that up within the next few days. And the University of Arizona is an equal opportunity affirmative action institution. And so that's my cue to share with you all a poll that we use for our affirmative action program. So let me launch that. And if you would just take a couple of minutes, actually it only is going to take you less than 10 seconds, answer those 3 questions, and I'll take that down. This is anonymous, and I just need it for reporting. So thank you for doing that. Get the slides back up here. Here's our agenda for today. Thank you for everybody who came in a little bit early to log in, a little lag time, make sure everything's working. My name's Chris Jones. I'm your moderator. I'm doing the welcome. Today's topic is insects, weather, and climate with Dawn Gouge. She has about a 30-minute presentation, perhaps a little bit longer. We will be doing the question and answer discussion with Dawn when she finishes up, and we will wrap up by noon and in this call. However, if you have any questions and we go over time, as long as Dawn is willing to stay with us, we're going to answer those questions for you. So thanks for being with us. Here's our speaker today. Dawn is our extension specialist in urban entomology at the Maricopa Agriculture Center, the University of Arizona. So Dawn, welcome. It's great to have you with us today. I don't know if everybody had a chance to look at your bio, but I was looking through that, and it seems like you do some of that crime scene investigation stuff. You know, you look at the bugs. That was kind of cool. So what was that called? Kind of
medical criminal. Yeah.
Medical criminal. So I don't know. Don't want to eat into your presentation, but it'd be kind of cool to hear a little bit about anything you've done on that.
Everybody thinks that, and then they see the photos, and everybody changes their mind.
Well, very good. Well, I am ready to just hand it over to you. Please feel free to pull up your slides, and you have our rapt attention for the next hour.
Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome.
And thank you so much for inviting me to talk about this. I think when we first spoke and you first extended an invitation to talk to the group, I was super excited about focusing in on climate change specifically and how it's affecting insects around the world, as well as right at home. And then we had this really bizarre year where we had tons of rain and sort of relatively moderate temperatures. And the timing of it was really exceptionally perfect for certain things to happen. And so we've had this monumental bug population explosions that everybody was talking about. And so my attention was being diverted all year, including right now, to dealing with this sort of the crisis of the bad bugs, and whilst taking a little bit of time to enjoy some of the wonderful life out there as well. So I hope you don't mind. I sort of changed things up a little bit. We'll mostly talk about what has happened this year, and then right at the end we'll talk about comparing this year with the previous year as a fairly typical year within the last 10 years. And then I'll talk a little bit about climate change effects on insects and ticks, as well as insects. So with that, I'll sort of get going here. So right at the beginning of the year, I'll constantly get calls from the media, and everybody wants to know what kind of bug year is it going to be. And, you know, it really depends on partially on what's happened the previous year. So this gives me enough of an inkling to develop an opinion always, but then it also is affected quite dramatically on what the weather conditions are throughout the coming year. And of course, we have no clue what that's going to look like, but we constantly try to predict, and we can't, it's irresistible. And so I constantly give an answer, and all I can say is that I am reliably incorrect pretty much year after year after year. So if you ever hear me answering what kind of bug year is it going to be this year, just take it all with a pinch of salt. But I thought that it'd be helpful to sort of give you a swath of beautiful bug pictures that represent different time points in the year quite normally. And you'll see that on this slide, it clearly we're focusing on the very, very beginning of the year and those amazing things that we find out there. But what it doesn't have is a January written on this slide. And that's because depending on the weather conditions in January and February, some of these things can happen at different times. So, but you'll see right at the top of the picture, that is a bunch of bark scorpions. They're very, very gregarious. They love to cuddle, and over the winter, they'll gather together in usually 30 to 50 bark scorpions, and they will hunker down in these hibernacula. And so it's not that we see them very terribly often in January, but every now and then somebody takes down a wall, or there's a flooding event, or something happens where there's a hibernacula gets disturbed, and those bark scorpions suddenly become discovered by somebody. And that's really quite a remarkable thing to find on if you're lucky enough to find one in January. So then we also get lots of people calling in about these strange structures on twigs. So that's a manted egg case that you can see right there that just looks like a blob of brown chewing gum stuck on a twig. And it's not that they're not there at other times of the year, they are, but you don't get to see them once there's foliage covering them. So what you'll hear me say is these references to calls that I get and email inquiries. And so the way I've catalogued all of these insects for you in these slides reflects the kinds of questions that we get that time of year. So there's a sea arid fly right there. Those are those little tiny fungus gnats that fly around, and then quite often they'll start to infest. If you have potted plants inside your home, they'll get to those and then set up home and start creating some issues. And then that's the convergent lady beetle right there, right in the middle of the slide. And those will actually start moving down from the mountain tops and showing up as adults right at the beginning of the year. And we also have flourishing flies at that time of year as well. And then finally, that's a buck moth silkworm. So these beautiful adults will be around at that time of year, although they're kind of hard to find. So there's right early in the year, we get lots of aphids. We'll get crane flies emerging from grass, and that's that gigantic mosquito-like looking creature in the bottom left corner there. Right underneath well, actually above the crane fly, that's a grape flea beetle. There's some wonderful grape leaf skeletonizer moths. That's the iridescent blue moth right there that doesn't look like a moth at all. Then there's tent caterpillars, and right at the beginning of the year, you'll just see twigs that are festooned in silk. you won't really see, the caterpillars are just really teeny tiny, and so that silk builds up over time. And I'll show you some other pictures. Thrips are an issue, and then right at the beginning of the year, you'll start to see those paper wasps and green lacewings. I should have mentioned those because they're right underneath the aphid picture right at the top. So as sort of January moves into February and then into March, we're right into the spring season in Arizona. And then we get some, we can see some false chinch bugs. Those are the little tiny nymph bugs in the top left there. And they're not terribly obvious, but every now and then people will find them and get quite alarmed. They think they're immature kissing bugs or something that people are constantly worried about whenever they see anything that looks like a true bug in the way that does too. And then that is a buck moth larva that we'll find on mesquite that's on the right of the false chinch bugs. Then the woolly mass of fluff right there, those are, that's woolly, and a woolly apple aphid, and you can't really see the little critter very well because they generate all of this wax that is very, very protective of them. And then you heard me mention lady beetles laying eggs, and of course, a little bit into the spring, you'll start finding the larvae that look like little alligators marching around, and those are voracious predators. So then, of course, the tent caterpillars have got a little bigger at this point, and so then they start becoming more obvious as caterpillars and move to the outside of the silk before they actually disperse as individuals off to pupate. And then people will notice the huge carpenter bees that are flying around at that time of year as well. So as we're moving into April and on towards May, we'll get clover mites, bark scorpions will start moving around. We'll see crickets, and some of the grasshoppers will come out. Those red and black bugs are actually the little tiny nymphs of the giant mesquite bugs, which you'll see bigger later on. There's a bruchid beetle right there, that those start to emerge from the mesquite pods. And then ants really come alive and become a lot more obvious in the spring. And you'll find the southern fire ants that's on the left. And then you'll see the harvester ants on the right, and the leaf cutter ants starting to move around in the desert as well. So these are a group of we have a bunch of species. I think we have more than 25 different species of blister beetles in Arizona. And some years we have lots of blister beetles, and some years we don't. If you see them, in fact, if you see anything that looks like a blister beetle, don't, try to avoid picking it up. They will release cantharidin. The reason why they're called blister beetle is because that cantharidin, if it gets on your skin, it can cause blistering. Now, they're remarkably interesting beetles, and I could actually talk for an hour on just blister beetles, but I won't. I'll stop right there. They're beautiful creatures, but be careful. They can be a problem in forage crops, of course, that are going to be consumed by animals. And there are always a concern for horse owners as well because of that. So then later in April, we'll get the pin-caped beetles that will march around and stick their rear ends up if they're disturbed. We'll get digger bees, which is on the bottom left there. That's a beautiful digger bee. We'll get giant crane flies emerging in some locations in Arizona. People get very excited when they start to see those. And then we'll get our really impressive, that's a pallid-winged grasshopper right there. And they'll be at a size where people will be hopping around, and they're a pretty big grasshopper. So that's something that we get a lot of calls, not that anybody can do anything about them. So then Carpenter bees, we have a variety of different species in Arizona, and they kind of show up at different times a little bit throughout the spring. And then you'll see that Polistes wasp, that's a paper wasp, that is just beginning to create the cotton nest or the umbrella nest. And that umbrella nest will start to grow and expand over time. You can see that one is just beginning in April, and she's laid some eggs in those cells that she will guard very carefully. So then there's a bunch of these plant bugs, and that is a small milkweed bug, but we have a whole slew of little plant feeding bugs that come out in the spring, sometimes in relatively large numbers. Some of them are attracted to lights and will invade structures. And then right at April is when my field season really gets going, because I work on mosquitoes and most years. And this is a floodwater species that you can see right there. And there will be these huge blooms of these mosquitoes in the spring. And then sometimes in the fall months, we'll get a second bloom of those floodwater mosquitoes. Now, they're not a significant vector of viruses. So this is not a mosquito that we get terribly worried about, although they bite people, and they can be rather unpleasant because of that when they're in extremely large numbers. So then we'll get some swarming of insects in spring. This is a carpenter ant that's climbed to the top, and she's ready to take off. You can see her little, she's a queen. She's got that little crown on her head there, and she's ready to go. And then right at the beginning of April actually is when our caddisfly season starts. And caddisfly season, depending on where you are in Arizona, can last for most of the year in some places. And this is a really interesting creature right here. These are web spinning caddisflies. And so you can see the adults just look like a sort of gray, nondescript, sort of moth-like creature, although they're not moths. And they have these aquatic immature stages that you can see, and they actually will spin these beautiful nets and knit the debris on the bottom of canals to catch things that they'll feed on in their nets. They're just fascinating creatures. So then, spring comes and goes pretty quickly in the low desert, if that's where you're at in Arizona, or in the low desert in the Southwest. And then we're right into, I call May summer, because it really, and sometimes even April, those temperatures can be quite high. And it's really in May that the kissing bugs really are out as adults, and they are strongly attracted to lights after dark. And they'll start to move into buildings if there's cracks and crevices or doorways that they can get into. Sometimes they will stay in just feed on rodents, but they will certainly feed on people if they get the chance. They'll take a blood meal from any warm body that's available at the time they're hungry. Then we'll see some of the Puxus wasps flying around, and the tarantula hawks as well. And they will, they're just gorgeous, huge wasps that fly around. The males don't sting, of course. The females sting, and they have some of the extremely painful stings. The good thing about this group of wasps is it hurts like heck, but they don't do any long-term damage to you. So they're good communicators. They're just saying, leave me alone, and they're not actually going to hurt you at all once you've stopped screaming and you're feeling better. So, and then we have these otitid flies, which people will notice. They have quite a fancy way of dancing around and moving their wings, and so and they're beautifully elegant flies, and people will notice those. And then people can be quite horrified when they find the caterpillars This is a swallowtail orange dog caterpillar, and it just looks like a pile of bird poop or something equally as unpleasant. And some people will get rather dramatically upset at when these arrive on their plants, but they are absolutely glorious butterflies. So try to encourage people to leave them alone. Yes, they'll eat some of your citrus leaves, but generally speaking, they won't do the trees any harm. And then honeybees will start to really get, they start their activity, of course, very early on. They'll become more apparent in May, and even we'll have early swarms even during May. So this is just to say that by May, if you discover a feral colony of honeybees, please consider them to be defensive. So these are baby bees inside a colony, and those bees are going to be highly protective of those baby bees. They are just protecting their brood. So loud noises, vibrations, people disturbing them, they can react defensively. And this year we've had quite a lot of unfortunate incidents with feral honeybees. So please consider them all Africanized to some extent and ready to defend their babies. So later in May, so you'll see those giant mesquite bugs that were those little black and red things to begin with. They're still immatures, and there's a couple of adults in that picture on the top left there. But they'll become a lot more noticeable because they're very red and white and black, and they will congregate in groups, and they will move up and down tree trunks depending on how hot it is at what time of the day. So they will thermoregulate themselves as groups moving up and down tree trunks. And when they're down, when it's super hot and they move down, that's when people notice them. They've been there all the time, but we just can't see them when they're up in the canopy. So by June, we're getting some cicadas, or even May, where some cicadas, we get outdoor cockroaches will start building up in numbers. They get depressed in populations to some extent over the winter, but not a whole lot really. But those are American cockroaches right there, and you'll see that white cockroach that is molting, so it's shedding its exoskeleton, and they're white to begin with. And get always, people call in and say, I found an albino cockroach. Is this a rare find? And they'll be disappointed when they next look at that cockroach, and they'll realize that it's just the new cuticle. It takes time to darken, and so next time they look at it, it'll be a bog standard American cockroach. And then the false chinch bugs are now sort of ready to move around as adults to a greater extent. So also in May, we'll get springtails, people who really like to irrigate their lawns a lot. I think this is less of a Tucson thing, more of a Phoenix metro area where everybody wants to grow grass. And they will look after the lawns very carefully, and they'll put lots of organic matter down, which is great. But for the fact that people don't really like these little springtails, that then it really helps support large populations of them. They're harmless, and they're really quite fascinating, teeny tiny little creatures, but people do get a little alarmed by them. And then in May, we'll start seeing the May and June bugs. And the May and June bugs are just this group of scarabs, and there's a whole bunch of them. I think we've got more than 30 species in Arizona that all have these wonderful, gigantic eyelashes. Well, it's their antennae. It's not their eyelashes, but they look to me like gigantic eyelashes. And then we'll start seeing some leaf cutter bees start to take those scoops out of leaves on plants. Also in May, we'll start seeing some swarming of more ant activity, and harvester ants start really collecting a bunch of things from out and around. That's actually a harvester ant being attacked by Phenology ants in the bottom left there. That harvester ant must have just gone a little too close to where those Phenology ants are, and they're all attacking it and chasing it off. They probably won't kill it, but they will certainly move it away from their colony. So the Phenology ants are ants that if you see them trailing, they are sugar loving ant, and if you squish them and smell what they smell like as little squished ants, they smell like sort of a coconut kind of pina colada kind of drink. And then the critter at the top there with the long wings. So we get drywood termites swarming at this time of year in May. And in fact, they'll sort of swarm, different species will swarm between May and September throughout the year, depending on the weather conditions. And we also have dampwood termites that start swarming in May also. So then, here you can see there's the actual giant mesquite bug adults. People will start noticing brown dog ticks showing up from time to time. The warm temperatures, they will really start to, they're a warm loving tick, although they're pretty hardy and survive over the winter pretty well too. And they are a tick that if it's brought into the home and the females will lay their eggs inside a home, the brown dog tick can actually complete its entire life cycle inside homes. So it's, and that's pretty unusual for a tick. And then Western widow spiders, people will start noticing them in May. You can see the adult females very, very easily. They just create these incredibly strong, resilient webs in corners that are protected but have a little bit of an air current so that flying things get caught in their webs. What people don't see, and so next time you see an adult female, take a closer look at the web, because you will rarely, if you just glance there, see the male widow spiders. They're these teeny tiny skinny little things that are quite often on the periphery of the web. They just hang out. And next time you get an opportunity, look for those tiny spiders, because you'll be amazed what they look like. Right, and then adult antlions will fly around too. Those are pretty cool critters. Wood boring beetles start to move around, and they will start attacking at this time of year heat stressed trees, particularly drought and heat stressed trees. People who are trimming palm fronds, the pink little caterpillar there, that's a palm caterpillar, and they will get dislodged and knocked off, and then they start crawling up the sides of people's homes, and people get very alarmed at lots and lots of little pink caterpillars. When you smush them, they are red inside too. Every now and then, people will find the giant palm borer beetles. These are huge black bostricid beetles, which look like they've got their head kind of scooched underneath their thorax, and they're pretty remarkably large in size and robust beetles. And then sharpshooters. We have a bunch of different species of sharpshooters. Some are really bright, a lot of are really brightly colored, and they look like these little alien beings, and they're just plant feeding bugs. So as soon as the monsoon rains start, just insect activity goes nuts in the desert. Probably, the most limiting factor that everything needs to live is water, and as soon as it's overly abundant, everything really capitalizes on that. So we'll be swarming ants and swarming termites. And during the monsoons, we have drywood, dampwood, and subterranean termites that all swarm under different conditions. The ants there are actually leafcutter ants. and the females will mate with multiple males before she starts setting up her colony. And they're really astonishing to see if you're lucky enough to see them as a big ant. Harvester ants are also big ants, and during July and August, they're super busy and active when they really start. They also will swarm during monsoon season. Quite often you can see them patrolling around. The entrance to their nests are really obvious. There'll be this cleared part of earth. Sometimes you'll see these radiating sort of pathways that come out of this colony and go off in different directions. And the ants follow those little walkways, often will forage for huge distances around their colony. This is a female that is ready to take flight. Also during July, it's really the big and small bug month. Whiteflies and our teeny tiny plant feeding bugs will start to increase in numbers quite exponentially. But then there's these big bugs that people see that really grab everybody's attention. That's a Palo Verde beetle right there. And we actually have a number of really huge boring beetles that are apparent. And they fly. So if you get hit by one when you're on a motorcycle or a push bike, you won't forget it. And then there's these ferocious looking sulpugids, which will scamper around in the desert that people will find. And then of course, during the monsoon season, we get lots and lots of Indian house crickets. We didn't this year. So that was one interesting creature that was not noticed around homes this year. Now, I'm not going to jump to any conclusions that I'm sure they were around. They just weren't found and reported in large numbers around homes for some strange reason. Monsoon season, you'll find those adult mantids, and we have some spectacular looking mantids in Arizona. And you can imagine, like, not ever actually finding this is a unicorn mantid, because that's what they look like. They just look like little twigs. But we do have a whole bunch of really spectacular ones too. This year was a really good year for mantids, and we'll talk a little bit about why that was in a minute. This is also the time of year when you get to see these unusual looking creatures that are the size of the palm of my hand. The amblypygids are incredibly ferocious looking, remarkably gentle creatures that you can very carefully hold if you want to. Some of us find that irresistible. Similarly, vinegaroons are just totally cool. And neither of these creatures will really harm you, although the vinegaroons can spray acetic acid, and they will do that if they feel frightened. And that is how they defend themselves against predators. So usually during the summer months, the heat of the summer, bark scorpions, if it's super hot, will actually, their activities will decline, but they'll start having babies. They'll start finding these scorpions covered in little teeny weeny little wee baby scorpions. These scorpions give life to live young. So if you're ever lucky enough to see a female giving birth to them, she will very carefully pull them out, and she creates this little birthing basket with her pedipalps and her front legs, and she will carefully pop those little tiny baby scorpions on her back and carry them around. And in fact, those babies will climb on and off of scorpions, not just their mother, but other members that they in their area, without being eaten, and they'll put up with the male scorpions will carry relatively large nymphs around and seem to be quite happy to cart them around. The scorpion you can see in the bottom left there, that is a scorpion that is actually taking they'll drink free water. So that's actually a drinking scorpion. We have some large scorpions. This is a desert hairy scorpion. They can be between 5 and 6 inches in length, and those are really beautiful. There's only one scorpion that will actually send folks to the emergency room, and that's the bark scorpion. So be careful with scorpions. If you find them in your pool, please be aware that bark scorpions will fall. They just go completely limp and act all pathetic, sink to the bottom. And what they're doing is they've just shut themselves down. They're not dead. They'll take a while to actually drown. So people are always alarmed when they pull things out of the pool and they start to move around. There's a scorpion coming into the building where I work. This is one we found in the house, and my kid is constantly horrified at whenever we find something like this in our house. I get my camera out and can't help but taking pictures. Southern fire ants will be very, very active after rains. After rains, they just bloom. And I just wanted to show this picture because there's honey and there's a slice of turkey or something called that index card. And you can see that those ants go nuts for protein. They love to feed on things that are high protein, high fat, and they will just pass on by. And most fire ants will behave like that. This is my sister's pantry on the right there. Always a great location to find all kinds of creepy crawlies. The other pictures of the ants that have come into the home and become pestiferous when they do that, that is not from my sister's pantry. I'm sure she wants me to say that for the record. But this is just an opportunity for me to say that ants, when they're on the outside, they are remarkably beneficial creatures. It's just really when they come inside that they generate a problem. So in August, we'll start seeing the adult leaf-footed bugs. We'll get the male tarantulas will start wandering around the desert floor looking for females in burrows. And then we start seeing in higher elevations in Arizona, we'll start seeing the larger scarabs. This is a Dynastes beetle right here, and these are just gigantically glorious flying beetles that we're lucky enough to live with. Also, during August and the monsoon season, we will get fleas. We'll start noticing fleas and brown dog ticks. Really, this is the time of year that they become really, they'll start becoming more noticeable on pets if they're around. Generally, it's cat fleas that dogs will pick up as well as cats. And then the huge green fig beetles that fly around, and they sound like a huge, gigantic airplane as they move around. They are just beautiful scarab beetles. Also, heading now sort of to the end of summer, we'll start getting these caterpillar migrations. And we will get armyworms. We will get, the white line sphinx moth larvae that you can see here, and then I think a picture of that. So this is a salt marsh caterpillar, and then the armyworms will also start to move around to some extent. This year we had lots and lots of white-lined sphinx moth larvae, and in days gone by, indigenous people collected them and had a feast on these caterpillars at this time in the monsoon time of year. Darkling beetles we'll see, and long-legged flies, and then grasshoppers, various kinds, the horse liver and plains liver, and then tussock moth larvae. Don't touch them. And then heading further on in through the year, we'll get false box elder bugs and assassin bugs. We have lots and lots of different kinds of assassin bugs in Arizona. People look at them and they get very, very worried that they're kissing bugs. We also do get a lot of kissing bugs in Arizona as well, but the assassin bugs are predatory bugs on generally other bugs. So then heading into October, we'll get the puss moth caterpillars, we'll get the adult, the melaleuca moths, and we'll get the twig girdlers, the mesquite twig girdlers, which are rather large girdling beetles. So that is usually the 1 week of fall we get, and then we are back into the winter months. So that sort of gave you a really rapid review of what a typical year looks like quite normally. Those are subterranean termites that will carry on swarming right through November and sometimes into early November. And then we'll also see the clothes moths. That's usually because people start unpacking their winter gear. And that is a stonefly, which if you're lucky enough to see those and you're near a waterway where they're emerging from, they are remarkable looking creatures as well. So what kind of year was this year? And this is what the desert looked like in February this year, and that's not that unusual. But this is. So the desert basically remained green and lush and full of vegetation all year this year, and to some extent still is. And I thought it would be helpful to understand why it was such an exceptional year this year for insects and wildlife in general. I thought it'd be good to compare last year, which is pretty typical for the previous several years, what the weather was like last year compared with this year. So last year was actually, when I say it was pretty typical, it was hotter than what was typical. The weather pattern for the state might have been fairly typical, but in the low desert areas, we had lots and lots of very, very hot days. In fact, we had Phoenix set about 33 different records for heat. So if we look at the extreme heat, what's really interesting is also the timing of when that occurred. So in 2020, we had really high temperatures. And when you can see those zigzags going up and down, that is what the actual temperature did during 2020. Those bands are the average highs, which is red, the average lows, which is the purple, and then the gray bit in the middle is sort of the mean band of temperatures. So you can see we had excessively high, unusually high temperatures in April, May, July, August, September, and October, and even into November. In 2021, however, we had relatively moderate temperatures early on. We had a little peak in April, and then we did have a considerable peak in June, and then September as well. So it certainly wasn't that we were just in that very average, comfortable range. We did have some significant peaks in temperature this year. But here's where the years really differed. So what you're seeing in these graphs is the Phoenix daily measured precipitation in 2020 and compared to 2021. And you can see 2020 had that usual rain pattern in the spring, and then nothing until the very end of the year in December. This year, you can see that we had considerable precipitation for most of the months all the way through. And if you look at the humidity index, that's what it looked like in 2020 compared to 2021. So from an entomologist's perspective, I think this was what was so critically important in maintaining all that wonderful plant life throughout the year, and then the ensuing insect blooms that we saw was as a result of that. This just compares the whole state for this year, right in June, where we were as far as the drought monitoring was concerned, relative to where we were in September 21st this year. So we received, and we were thankful for it, a whole lot of rain. And this, of course, is what happens as a result. Population explosions, we saw monumental caterpillar movement. We had moths of many wonderful different kinds, lots of hawk moths, lots of these strange little gray moths that are, which are still emerging now, which are Boolean moths. Then we had lots of sulfurs, those yellow butterflies in the middle. We had tons of monarch lookalike butterflies, and the butterfly on the right hand side there is a snout butterfly, which I'd never seen before, and I saw so many. It was just unbelievably remarkable. Now, with all of that organic matter and all of that rain, of course, we get an awful lot of dead organic matter that is being broken down by our natural recyclers, but tons and tons of flies that will develop in decaying matter, in decaying organic matter. So we had the caliphorids, which are those shiny metallics, and the sarcophagids, which are the checkered flies, tons and tons and tons of house flies. And it was just simply as a result of having all that great rain, or having tons of plant life, but then dead plant life that is consumed by the detritivores. Lots and lots of calls, lots of people worried about termites. It was a great termite year. These, however, these are Nathamotermes termites. They produce this great cotton of covering over things and are not structural pests at all, but cause concern. Lots of ants of various kinds. These are carpenter ants that are ready to swarm. Lots and lots, same sister, same pantry. These are also southern fire ants. And you can see the different sizes in the ants moving around there. That's one of those things that tells you you're dealing with fire ants. We had a really great year for bees of different kinds. The bees that you can see in the video and in the bottom right there, these are long-horned bees, and we had tons and tons of paper wasps. Paper wasps are predators, whereas the honeybees are not, obviously, and neither are the longhorn bees. But predators did really, really well. From the mantids, we had glorious garden spiders, tons of calisoma beetles. You can see an adult and an immature calisoma beetle there on the right. So here's where it got a little serious. We talked a little bit about the early blooms of floodwater mosquitoes, and that was certainly the case this year. We also had lots of Aedes aegypti mosquitoes that are the you breed it, you feed it mosquito that does not move very far from where it's emerging. So if you're getting bitten during the day by these beautiful black and white stripy creatures, it's your fault generally. But this is where it got real serious. We had lots and lots of Culex, the southern house mosquito. And because we've had very high populations in certain areas in Maricopa County, specifically, you can see from the data there, we have had a lot of West Nile virus cases. So typically we have about 100 clinical cases on average per year for the state. And you can see that the numbers here, and we're not even at the end of the year, are in the thousands, and we've had 57 fatalities. Usually we have between 1 and 9. Mosquitoes were hellacious. And whenever you have like extreme weather, you're going to have some winners and you're going to have some losers. And I'm not really sure that those creatures that we didn't see a lot of this year are actually legitimately in the loser, should be in the loser side of that sign. I think it was just because there was so much opportunity for them out in the desert. They were probably just less apparent around where people were. So I'm going to sort of have a few slides, if I may, specifically talking about climate. And so climate is different from weather. The weather is just the atmospheric conditions of the moment, whereas climate is the average of the weather conditions over many, many, many years. So focusing a little bit on climate, there is no debate in the scientific community that we have a warming planet. In the Western states, we're home to 4 of the fastest warming cities. Our cities in the West are becoming less livable because of extreme temperatures. I really like this website. This is a UA website that is put together that monitors when spring is sprung, whether it's early or late in a given area, and that also is an indicator of climate change. And so you can see that much of Arizona is in that early, indicated by red where the spring was early. Now this really worries biologists who study phenology. Phenology is the study of the cycles of in nature where plants and animals, including insects, have to be in sync with one another. If you have a plant that is pollinated by a specific animal, they have to coordinate in order to benefit one another. And that's just one rudimentary example of many, many things that are in sync. When temperatures change, when climate changes over time, those cycles can be disrupted, where there is a mismatch, where one organism is less resilient than another. And the interdependency causes populations potentially to crash. So getting super serious for a few slides before we end, not only is this important for ecosystem maintenance, but for crop production. And you can see there are a few things that you probably love. For me, there's more here. And those beautiful pink flowers on that top row on the right-hand side there, that is a chocolate tree. So just finishing a few vector thoughts and realizing why perhaps over time we have a worsening situation with vector-borne diseases. So those diseases that are transmitted by mosquitoes and ticks are of greatest concern to us in Arizona. The warmer and the longer it's warm and wet, the more mosquito life cycles can be completed in the same given amount of time. Ticks are similarly impacted in Arizona. We really don't know how many generations of brown dog ticks it's possible to have in Arizona. It could be 4 or 5 even, is in theory, but we really don't know. But of course, the more generations within a given year, the more problematic. And as they're disease-causing vectors, they'll impact our life to a greater extent as our temperatures warm. In general, increasing temperatures increase the rate of reproduction. Also, replication of pathogens, infection rates go up, and infection rates of the hosts that are the reservoir hosts that maintain those viruses and other pathogens and bacterial pathogens as well increase. And I did also want to mention, because this impacted the people in Gila County so severely this year, that climate is inherently linked with the disasters in the West that are increasing in incidence. And for us, wildfire is probably one of the most terrifying ones to deal with. This year, between the beginning of June and the end of July, there was 3 significant fires and an incredibly devastating flood. And I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that this is in part due to climate change, and floods often follow fire events. Essentially, the organic materials that are there burn at such a high intensity that they form substances form a hydrophobic layer on the surface of the soil. So when rain events follow, the earth cannot absorb the water. So it's not just simply the removal or the reduction of trees and ground cover. It is also an impermeable layer of ground. And those flood events will just hurtle down as a result of that fire impact. The West is that population areas in Arizona have an average a greater wildfire likelihood than most of the US. And this is just to say that climate change effects are ecologically complex. There's some things that we think we can predict, and there will be a whole bunch of impacts that we've not even thought of that we have yet to discover. So something to be terribly cognizant of in all that we do and how we live our lives. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening today. And if you have questions, please don't hesitate to email me. And please consider the environment in everything that you do. And don't forget to enjoy the small life that's creeping and flying around you. Thank you.
Dawn, thank you so much for your excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it. I know our people were engaged. We had some technical difficulties where we weren't able to close out this presentation. So we're adding this ending. And unfortunately, we were not able to take people's questions. And so we apologize for that. But we want to make this recording available to people. Here's our closing. And so with that, everybody have a good day, and we'll see you at the next webinar.